So, our afternoon keynote speaker is Sophia Kianni, presenting Climate Change Accessibility. Sophia is an Iranian-American environmentalist studying climate science and public policy at Stanford University. She is the founder and executive director of Climate Cardinals, an international nonprofit with 8,000 volunteers in 40-plus countries working to translate climate information into more than 100 languages. She represents the United States as the youngest member on the inaugural United Nations Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change and sits on numerous boards and advisory councils, including the New York Times, the World Economic Forum, the IRIS Project, and Ashoka. Please give a warm welcome to Sophia Kianni.
So today I'm really excited to be speaking to you all about my journey as a climate activist, why I'm so passionate about this issue, how I got involved, and then give some broad oversight over why Gen Z cares so much about climate and how the older generation can support us in intergenerational collaboration. So next slide is an overview of why I became a climate activist. So like I mentioned, I'm Iranian American. Both of my parents are from Iran, and growing up, I would always go and see Iran during the summers. And on one of my last visits, when I was 12 years old, I was struck by how awful the air pollution was. Specifically, it was so bad that I could barely see the stars at night, and I learned that thousands of people in Iran were being hospitalized because of air pollution, and that the Middle East was really on the front lines of a climate crisis, meaning that temperatures there were rising more than twice the global average. And this was having a disproportionate impact on Iran, and heat waves there were also leading to water mismanagement in the region, which was exacerbating conflict, and Iran is already really going through a human rights revolution. And so a combination of these factors led me to talk to my relatives about this issue, and I had just learned about climate change in my 6th grade class. And so I approached my relatives with some of the statistics and learnings that I had gleaned, but I was surprised when they told me that they didn't know anything about climate change. The words carbon dioxide, global warming, these were all foreign terms to them. And so I decided to dig into what I perceived as a lack of climate education in Iran, and I actually found a study that read only 5% of Iranian university students at that time could properly explain the greenhouse gas effect. And this really alarmed me, and I realized I wanted to do something about it. I wanted to talk to my relatives about this issue, even though I couldn't find any resources available online in Farsi, which is Iran's native language. On the UN web pages and the web pages that I would frequent to learn about climate change myself in school, pretty much all of it was only available in English or at best the 6 UN languages. And so I decided to work with my mom to translate climate resources into Farsi so that I could talk to my relatives about the issue of climate change. And when I gave them my PowerPoint presentation, I was never happier to see fear plastered all over their faces, because translating the resources had succeeded in convincing them that climate change was a real and pressing threat. And it was really my first experience seeing how powerful my voice could be as a young person, and also the use of leveraging my ingenuity to actually make a change. And that's when I got involved with a variety of different grassroots climate organizations through middle school and high school. And so specifically, these were This Is Zero Hour, Fridays for Future, and Extinction Rebellion. And what made each of these unique, This Is Zero Hour is the first organization I started to volunteer with. And what I really loved about them was the fact that they were almost entirely led by young women of color. And that's because they believe that the people who are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis are the ones who need to be leading this movement. And so that means that it's because women are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. So specifically, around 80% of climate refugees are women, and people of color are actually also disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis due to factors such as environmental racism. And then the other movements that I got involved in were Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion. So Fridays for Future is Greta Thunberg's movement, and it's characterized by striking every single Friday, specifically for youth and school-aged children. And Extinction Rebellion similarly believes in the power of nonviolent civil disobedience to make change happen. So if you look at the civil rights era, the women's suffrage movement, these movements were social movements were really all characterized by the use of protesting, getting out into the streets and striking and mobilizing in order to make the public care about the issue, about the issues that they were talking about, and specifically to put pressure on elected officials to take action. So I spent a number of years working with these different grassroots organizations, and our biggest tangible impact was, if you see on the next slide, we were able to mobilize over 4 million people to go out into the streets and strike in 2019 during the global youth climate strikes. And this is particularly significant because there had been several other strikes held in the past, and they were only able to get around a couple 100,000 people into the streets to strike for climate action. And that was primarily because they were only being led by adults. But once young people got involved, it was because of factors like social media and press that really were able to galvanize people to take action. And young people like Greta Thunberg were really able to inspire the world. And you can see in the picture there, that's a photo of me with Jane Fonda, who is an incredibly influential actress and activist. And so we organized a strike on Black Friday, and she got arrested, and numerous other people were arrested, really protesting to have their voices heard on Capitol Hill. And in 2019, it was also my first experience ever going viral. And I think it's important for the context of my story because this is kind of what kickstarted my public persona and a lot of my work and kind of catapulted me into the role that I am today. So when I was a junior in high school, I went on hunger strike with Extinction Rebellion, and I stayed hunger strike in Nancy Pelosi's office. And I skipped school to do it. And so a Washington Post reporter ended up interviewing me because I was the youngest person there and one of the only women to participate in the strike. And I basically told the reporter that I felt like the issue of climate was so serious and our politicians were not paying enough attention, and particularly around the rhetoric of calling the Green New Deal a Green New Dream. It was something really upsetting to me, and I wanted to have my voice heard. And I remember that a journalist asked me, why do you feel the need to go on a hunger strike? Do you not think that there are other means that you can take to have your voice heard? And I responded and said, would you even be here if I wasn't on a hunger strike? Would you be listening to what I had to say? And the press was all pretty much silent because I was right in the sense that nonviolent civil disobedience, all of these actions, protesting, that is what makes the world pay attention. And that's what I was really able to successfully leverage throughout high school when I was working on organizing with these various youth climate activist movements. But even still, for me, there was something missing. And so if you see on the next slide, I was really struck by the fact that almost all of these organizations that I was working with had their resources and information only available in English. And we were primarily engaging with American and European activists who were mostly white and English speaking. And I couldn't help but think that we were leaving a sizable portion of the population behind in our advocacy. And specifically, I couldn't help but think that we were leaving people like my relatives behind, people who were being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. And so in my senior year of high school, I decided to start Climate Cardinals, which is an international youth-led nonprofit with the goal of making climate education more accessible to people who don't speak English. And I love to tell people the story of how Climate Cardinals even got started, because they really think that it's an anecdote for the fact that anyone can do what I did, particularly if you're a young person. So on the very first day that Climate Cardinals launched, I worked with one of my best friends to make a TikTok video, inviting young people from around the world to volunteer with us if they wanted to get community service hours and translate resources in a similar way that I did for my relatives. And so on this very first day that we launched the TikTok video, it went viral and reached hundreds of thousands of people. And we had over 1,000 young people sign up to volunteer with us on the very first day. And a Forbes reporter even reached out and wrote a profile on us and the fact that we had been able to galvanize so many people in such a short period of time. And so now, two and a half years later, Climate Cardinals has grown to over 9,000. This is a little outdated. We recently passed over 9,000 student volunteers in over 40 countries. And we've been able to translate over 500,000 words of climate resources into over 100 different languages. And we've been able to do this with very little fundraising and almost entirely on a volunteer basis, with the help of our directors who help to run the organization from day to day. And I really think this is a testament to the power of young people and the fact that we've been able to accomplish so much with so little. And it makes me think about what would be the impact of a concentrated effort by governments, scientists, and policymakers with real tangible funding behind it. And young people are going to play a crucial role in all of that, and language accessibility is also going to play a crucial role in all of that. Around a year ago, I won the TED Talks Global Idea Competition. And my radical idea was that to tackle climate change, we need to translate climate information. And while I was researching for that TED Talk, I learned actually that while 75% of the world doesn't speak English, 80% of scientific literature is only available in English. And when I was first researching to find climate resources for my relatives, I remembered only finding it the UN web pages and only information available in the UN languages. And I learned that the UN languages actually count for less than half of the world's speaking population, meaning that the majority of the public is unable to understand the documents and agreements that are being issued by the world's highest international political body. So again, I continued to understand that we were leaving so much of the population behind in our advocacy, and that even of the 10 countries that are worst impacted by climate change, 9 of them are a majority non-English speaking. So this theme of accessibility and inclusion became a really crucial facet of my activism. And on the next slide, you'll see that's part of what transitioned to me working with the United Nations. And so around half a year after I started Climate Cardinals, the UN reached out and told me that I had been nominated to join their Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change as the US representative and the youngest member. And so I obviously graciously accepted this nomination. And so I've now, for the last 2.5 years, served as a youth advisor to the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, the head of the United Nations. And the reason I think that this is particularly incredible is that it really is the first example of young people tangibly being given a seat at the table and having the opportunity to get their voices heard and to concretely contribute to climate solutions. So while I think that the work that I did throughout high school in terms of organizing strikes was incredibly important, I also think that the next link to advocacy was really involved in getting engaged in political processes, specifically because when you look at the number of companies that are responsible for 70% of the world's emissions, it's just industrial emissions, it's just 100 companies. And it's part of the reason why I've really been an advocate for the idea of systemic change. And so while I believe that individual action is important, ultimately, if we want anything to happen, then we need to hold polluters, we need to hold the oil and gas industry responsible because they're the ones who are disproportionately emitting. And so through my work at the UN, I've really been able to advocate for this, advocate for the end of new fossil fuel development and for investment in clean and renewable energy, to push for fossil fuel financing, specifically for developing nations, and a whole host of other issues. And what's been really awesome is that I've been able to do this alongside 6 other incredible young people from all over the world. We represent 7 different regions. And so my colleagues are from India, from Moldova, from Sudan, from Fiji. from Brazil, and it's been really incredible to hear their stories and to hear more from them about what climate justice looks like for them. So specifically, one of the biggest issues that I've learned about from them that they've really clearly highlighted to me is the issue of making sure Indigenous voices are prioritized in the climate fight, particularly because Indigenous people protect the majority of the world's biodiversity, and they've been advocating on behalf of the planet for far longer than most of us have, and yet their forests, their homes are being completely pillaged and destroyed. And then other themes that my colleagues have really highlighted have been around financing, so investing in green jobs and green infrastructure, and then also making sure that when we are investing in green jobs, we're also investing in reskilling and upskilling displaced workers who were previously working in the fossil fuel industry to ensure a sustainable and just transition for all. So these are just some of the themes, but it's really been an incredible experience. And I think one of the biggest highlights for me was last year, we co-organized and I co-chaired the first ever Youth for Climate conference, which was co-hosted by the government of Italy and the UNDP. And so we brought over 400 young people from over 100 countries together in Milan, and we were able to write several proposals that I and a few other young people then presented to John Kerry and ministers from over 40 countries. And I think it was really the first example of youth activists being able to sit down together and tangibly write out what are our demands, what do we want to see from world leaders, and how can we work with them to actually make that happen. So again, I think that my work with the UN has really influenced me to become much more solutions oriented. In the sense of, I think it's important for the world to see youth activists as people who are actually pushing for the needle to change, instead of just simply talking about how the system is broken, but then not coming up with any alternatives for how we can move forward. And so on the next slide, you can see that one of my biggest calls to action in terms of moving forward has been that I think we need to move more people from apathy to action. And what I mean by this is that I think we are getting to a point where the majority of the public does believe in climate change. The Yale Center for Climate Communications and several other institutions have put around 70 to 80% of the US public now believes in climate change, which is a huge improvement. A few years ago, over 40% of adults in the world had never even heard of climate change. And so we are making headway, but I think the issue now lies in the fact that while people understand that climate is a big issue, they don't necessarily know what they can do about it, or they are not feeling particularly compelled to take the next step towards action. And I think that's what needs to change. We need a cultural mindset shift to make people understand that everyone can be an activist. And we need many more imperfect activists than people who are giving up flying and are vegan. That's not what it means to be an activist. To me, being an activist means finding a way to make a change happen in your community in any extent you can, in any way possible. I think everyone can be an activist. And I look at it when I see my peers. And my peers, they're studying a variety of different subjects. Some of them are studying fashion, and within those confines, they're learning about how to engineer more biodegradable textiles, for example. Or my friends who are studying engineering are learning about how they can produce more efficient solar panels. There are so many different ways that people can make an impact on the climate sector. And that doesn't have to mean studying climate science or studying environmental science at all. It means that whatever your chosen discipline is, whatever you're doing with your life, there are ways that you can think about the planet and think about how you can push for sustainability and for climate action. And I think step by step, if every single person feels empowered to feel like they can make a difference, then we collectively can have this revolution happen. And I think it's important to say that I didn't wake up one day and become a climate activist and have a full-fledged nonprofit and be like working at the UN and studying climate at Stanford. This was something that happened from the time I was 12 to I'm now 20, so an 8-year time period. And I think that every person's activism journey just needs to start with that first step. And so for me, that first step was translating those resources for my relatives. And I had no idea that it would lead me on this crazy journey. And I think for each of you, for everyone, it can start with something as simple as organizing a recycling drive, starting a community garden. I think that every single community has something that could be improved, and looking for ways to do that, I think, is the very first step that you can take towards making just your local community a better place. And I like to frame all of this within the context of the fact that climate change is of increasing importance to Gen Z, as you can see on the next slide. There are a number of statistics that really demonstrate how young people are taking up the mantle of change, in the sense that you can see this table shows that millennials and Gen Zers are increasingly reducing their use of single-use plastics. They're buying more organic and local food. They want to stop and reduce fast fashion, and they're considering environmental aspects of brands. And so this is particularly an important call out for businesses, because it shows that young adults are increasingly altering their personal consumption patterns to align with their values. And this is definitely something that I've seen among my friends, where we are more likely to thrift, or we're more likely to be vegan or vegetarian. And again, I think that the most important thing is systemic change and action, but I do think that these smaller micro level changes are just more significant and representative of the fact that as a society, we are reshifting our mindset around consumerism, and around how we interact with businesses. And so on the next slide, you can see that compared to adults, Gen Zers are talking more about the need for climate action. They're engaging more with social media content around climate, and they're also doing more to act on the issue through volunteering and attending rallies. But I do like to really point out something on this slide that I think speaks to the fact that there is a bit of virtue signaling in the climate movement, in the sense that you can see 2/3 of teens have talked about the need for climate action on social media, but then only 1/3 of them have actually personally taken action to address climate change within the last year. And I don't think that that's something intentional. I truly do believe a lot of people care about climate, but again, have not really been able to harness their sense of what can I do about it. And like I was saying earlier, I really think that it can look different for every single person. While for me, that took the form of starting Climate Cardinals and organizing nationwide strikes, for another person, it can take the form of get out the vote efforts. For another person, it can take the form of organizing a community closet for people to sell clothes to each other. There are a million and one ways to make an impact, but I think that really just trying to identify a way that you can is the first step to start. And I think that young people are the best poised to actually be able to make this difference, because we understand the usage of tools like social media. And I think that the landscape for activism has really changed in recent years, in the sense that it's now possible for someone like me from my childhood bedroom to be able to mobilize thousands of people to take action just from a simple video. And I think there is so much power in just sharing your thoughts and sharing your perspective. And I think the more people who are able to call out for action on social media, and then who are able to follow through with that and actually change something on the ground, I think that that will lead eventually to the shift that we need, and the chain of reactions that we need for people to inspire their friends, their peers, to also become climate activists. And I remember one thing that really always stuck out to me was that in my senior year of high school, when I organized like a successful protest, and one of my friends attended, afterwards she told me that she was so inspired by the speeches that she had heard at the protest, that she actually was going to start a environmental club at her school, because we went to two different schools. And that really touched my heart, and it's something that I think about a lot, where you never realize the impact that you as one person can have on so many others. And like, I even think about it in the sense that 2 weeks ago, I was able to go to India, and I met the Dalai Lama, and I was able to ask him a question. And I asked him about how we could support and empower young women who are working on issues like human rights and climate. And his response about the importance of leading with with peacefulness and love really had a profound impact on me and the way that I approached my work. And it just reaffirmed to me again the importance of conversations, the importance of calling into your community and just finding all the different ways that you can inspire people and provide them resources. And that's kind of leads to my call out on the next slide, which is that I think it's really important to step up for Gen Z and to stand up for sustainability, particularly because of the fact that I think a lot of young people, myself included, really have started to suffer from something the American Psychological Association is calling eco-anxiety, where 83% of Gen Zers say that they're concerned about the planet's health, but the concern can be debilitating. And I think it's part of the reason why people not just become apathetic, but are actually turned away from climate action because of the fact that it can feel so overwhelming. And I think that's why it's important to take everything step by step. You cannot wake up one day and choose to completely overhaul your life and to be a sustainable, eco-conscious consumer. I think that the most sustainable way for change to happen is for it to be incremental, and that for us to support young people, we do need to provide them with resources to combat their climate anxiety. And that can also take the form of offering them opportunities like green jobs, and really the potential to make an impact. I do think that a lot of anxiety can be mitigated through taking action and feeling a sense of agency over this incredible crisis. And so the last thing that I'll leave you guys with is some things that young people want to see. So the biggest thing above all, I think, particularly with the midterms coming up, this is very relevant, is voting. So like I was saying earlier, systemic change, systemic action, that's the biggest way that we're going to be able to make a difference. And so on an individual level, I think the most important thing that everyone can do is vote. And I think that that's one of the biggest ways that we can reframe accountability. And even if I'm 20 now, so a few years ago, I couldn't even vote. And I think even for people who can't vote, for younger students, or for people who want to vote and do more, getting out the vote efforts, education initiatives, voter drives, these are all really important ways to get people to support climate-friendly candidates and specifically officials who are believing in climate justice and are not taking fossil fuel money. And then also on a school level, getting schools to pass climate resolutions and committing to teaching climate education in school, specifically climate education through the lens of climate justice. I think for me, when I was learning about climate change in the classroom, it was always in a very black and white context. In the sense of like, oh, our CO2 emissions are rising, et cetera, et cetera. But it was never any of the new holistic understanding that I have of like women, children, elderly, lower income countries. These are all the communities that are being disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis. And so when we're coming up with solutions, we also need to be mindful of that and make sure that those communities that are being worse impacted, A, have a voice at the decision-making table, but B, are also getting priority when it comes to implementation of solutions, especially when you look at the fact wealthy countries like China, like the US, we're disproportionately emitting, but then it's actually countries like Africa that are facing the brunt of the climate crisis and are actually dealing with the loss and damage, which is why this financing for developing nations pledge is so important. And then also supporting businesses that are divesting from fossil fuels, that are putting an emphasis on sustainability, buying secondhand when you can, not buying at all. These are all great ways to kind of be conscious consumers and to alleviate against conspicuous consumerism. So don't buy anything unless you really have to, or try and swap clothes with people, try and find creative ways to really integrate sustainability into your life. And then lastly, educate others and uplift marginalized voices. Above being a climate activist, I think I honestly consider myself to be an education activist. I genuinely believe in the power of education to make a difference. And I think that the more young people who are able to take advantage of their education and to become informed on issues, the more leaders that we'll have and the more change makers that we'll have. I'm really fortunate to attend Stanford, and even though, I mean, I'm in Portugal right now, I'm speaking at Web Summit tomorrow, but I still really make it a priority to attend class and to stay on top of my work, because I do believe that every single new thing that I learn makes me a better activist and makes me a more informed and worldly person. Um, and I think that education really is the root for making people informed about issues that matter in the world, and also explaining to them what they can do about it and what their role can be. And so continue to educate yourself, continue to educate others, and make sure that people's whose stories are not being heard, make sure that you're able to give them a platform. And yeah, I think that that's a pretty comprehensive overview of me, my story, some of the work that I've done, and some learnings that I have for you all. But I'm really grateful that I was able to do this, and I definitely would love to answer any questions that you guys have. Thank you.
All I have to say is, you go, girl. She's doing some great work, and youth have been some of the most powerful voices in the climate justice movement, and Sophia is certainly an example of that. I'm sure you have questions, so please enter them into Mentimeter, and I will share them here. First question, Sophia, who inspires you and why?
There are a lot of people who inspire me, but I would say that I do take a lot of inspiration from my aunt, specifically because I think she showed me from a very young age that it's possible to be a strong, independent woman leader, and to really give back and care for others. I think my entire family has really emphasized social impact values in me, in the sense that my mom is a teacher. She works with kids, and my aunt, she works at a radiology center treating cancer patients. So I think that they really have always integrated in me the value of making the world a better place. And I think that that's what I've always tried to do with my climate activism.
Thanks. Your mix of activism and engagement in the UN is an interesting perspective. How would you encourage others to get involved in policy development?
I think it goes along with my recommendation of getting involved in political processes generally. Again, the midterm elections are coming up. Please go vote, get out the vote in your community, make sure people understand the interlinkage between climate and political action. I think that part of the reason I was really spurred to start working with the UN is because I did feel like there was a limit to how much I was able to accomplish with my activism without being directly involved in political processes. And I do think that having this direct line of questioning and direct line of engagement with the UN Secretary General, who's arguably one of the most powerful people in the world, has really been a game changer, because I think that that's how you're actually able to make change happen, is at the highest level.
Do we have any other questions for Sophia? Do you have the support of your parents and family?
Yes, I do. My family has been my biggest supporter through all of this. I remember last year when I was invited to go to Italy to co-chair this Youth for Climate conference, and it was the first time that I'd ever traveled alone. I think I was like 19. And I also had to miss a week of school to do it. And I think a lot of parents would have been pretty apprehensive about letting their daughter do that, let alone now having done that probably like 10, 15 times, of just traveling the world, spreading this message and working and meeting with policymakers. And so my family has been so supportive of me and has really encouraged me to take my activism as seriously as my schoolwork. And they really do believe that that through emphasizing these values of social justice in me, that it is making me a better person who's able to spread this message of inspiring other people to take action. So yes, my family is very supportive. And I do think that just generally being able to rely on your community and find people who can support you when you want to make a change is definitely a huge recommendation that I would have, because there's no way I've been able to do any of this work by myself. It's because of my friends, it's because of my peers, it's because of my teachers. A lot of different people had a profound impact on my activism, and I've really been able to lean on them for support.
What college classes have best informed your environmental work?
Oh, this is such an awesome question. There's been a couple. I would say I took an environmental history class last year that I really enjoyed, that taught me a lot about water justice, injustice, particularly near Palo Alto, where Stanford is. And we went and toured different like waste facilities, and were able to really see the impacts of environmental injustice on communities firsthand in lower income areas. And it was really eye-opening to see the difference in the privilege of where Stanford students were located, and where just 15 minutes away people did not have access to clean water. I took an environmental philosophy class as well that really shaped my framing of like how I view environmental solutions. And then I also took a Stanford Climate Ventures class. And so that was looking at the role of climate tech and the startup culture. So like the for-profit private sector in accelerating climate solutions. And that was also really interesting because most of my work has been mostly in the nonprofit and governance sector, but I actually do see a lot of potential in the private sector to make an impact.
Yeah, we're here on the campus of New College for this conference, and New College is looking at a year-long New College challenge to address climate change. I wonder if you could share, have the students at Stanford been successful in getting Stanford to adopt new policies and practices in regard to climate change?
I think that the part of the way that students have been successful is through organizing, through a combination of factors. I think that there's a pretty strong pipeline and dialogue between the student body at Stanford and with administrators. Like there are several committees and processes set up for there to be direct dialogue and for sessions to occur for like co-shaping of curriculum, et cetera. So I do think that like convening spaces like that are very important, like similar to the work that I have at the UN, where like students are able to sit down with administrators and co-create solutions. But then also activism, I think also is really important as well in terms of the New Door School has been, I think there's a lot of controversy around their acceptance of like the use of fossil fuel money. And a lot of students are still protesting and are still very unhappy with that. And I think that that is also very important. So I think being able to sit down with the administration and co-create solutions, but then also when there is a sense of dissatisfaction, being able to protest and engage in activism and advocacy. So a twofold approach.
Great. And where do you see yourself and your movement in the next 10 years?
I think ideally we will have made like tangible progress towards the goals set out in the Paris Climate Agreement. And I also hope that more spaces are created for young people and for marginalized people to participate in climate dialogues. I'm going to COP27 next week in Egypt. And I recognize that I'm very, very lucky and privileged to be able to do that because it is such a long expedition and it is so incredibly expensive. And a lot of important voices are left out of these discussions because of all these impediments and barriers. So I hope that in 10 years, there are a lot more inclusive processes.
What obstacles do you encounter while communicating sustainability to stakeholders throughout the world? Communicating climate change issues, I would think more.
Yeah, I think that issues definitely can fall in the sense of like something that we really have emphasized at Climate Cardinals is that like initially when we were picking reports and documents to translate, we realized like it doesn't make sense to go and translate like 100-page like super obtuse technical scientific report about climate because nobody's going to read it, and it's also because nobody's going to understand it, and it's not really going to give people information that they need. And so I think that that's also a problem in terms of like climate communication is that for scientists and for a lot of more like technical and scientific people, sometimes there's a disconnect between conveying the information in an accurate and factual manner, but then also doing it in a way that's interesting. Because there is, I think, a lot of importance in my work, in a lot of youth climate activist work, in storytelling. And so being able to connect the dots between, okay, like here's what the science is saying, but here's how we can present that in a more interesting way that also clearly demonstrates the urgency. So I think climate communication is definitely like a really huge piece of all of this. And I think it's part of the reason why we need more creatives in the climate space.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that you said your visit back home, really inspired you. Seeing what was happening there and being able to tell that story is very important. How do you make sure the information you are translating and sharing is credible?
So now the way that we work is, because of my position at the UN, we mostly partner with the UN to translate their climate documents. So we've done translations for the UNEP, for UNICEF, and right now I think we're doing translations for like the Yale Center for Climate Communications and some other institutions. But now the way that we do is we partner directly with organizations to translate their resources.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our audience today, Sophia?
I mean, I just guess I would say, like, I genuinely believe that every student is capable of accomplishing what I have. And I really urge young people to look at their communities, look local first, and see what change you can make happen. I guarantee you there's at least one thing about your school, about your district that could be better. And if you're able to identify how you can change that, then continuing to scale change from there to a national, to an international level. I think that like looking at as problems as incremental has been really, really helpful for me in terms of scaling up my activism. And I think it's a really helpful roadmap for other young people who want to make change happen as well.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sophia. Sophia Kianni, ladies and gentlemen.